I'm William Andreessen, host of Speaking with Students, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up on episode 256 of the House of EdTech podcast, it's time for Chapter 9, the final chapter of the book. I like to podcast and you will too, and today we're going to do conclusions, recaps, and next steps. Strike up the band. Welcome to the House of EdTech. My name is Chris Nesi. The House of EdTech launched in 2014, giving me the opportunity to speak with teachers, leaders, and creators so you can more effectively integrate technology, strengthen your pedagogy, and have more confidence in your classroom and school so you can make an impact. Get involved with the podcast by visiting my website, chrisnesi.com. Using technology isn't difficult, and this is where it begins. This is the House of EdTech. That's right. Welcome back. If you are a returning listener, if you're a first-time listener, welcome aboard. This is a great podcast for your anytime, anywhere professional development, and I'm so glad that you are listening to the House of EdTech. We're getting ready to finish the 10th year here on the podcast, and that means we're approaching year 11, and things will be changing in the new year, so I'm very excited to bring you a lot of new things, but for this episode, I'm very excited to welcome you back as I bring you the final chapter of I Like to Podcast and You Will Too, a House of EdTech Guide to Podcasting. This is a book that I self-published in August of 2023, and in addition to going through the next chapter, the final chapter of the book, I will also provide additional commentary on the topic of podcasting. If you'd like to pick up a copy of the book for yourself or somebody else, go to chrisnesi.com/I-like-to-podcast. The book is available physically, and it's also available for Kindles. And if you don't want to pick up a copy of the book, but you are getting value having listened to these episodes, and you'd like to show your appreciation, you can go to chrisnesi.com/support. I'd also like to invite you to join my Discord community, where we can discuss the book, technology, and of course, education. If you'd like to do that, go to chrisnesi.com/discord. And before we get into this, the 2024 SmackDown is coming because it's the end of the year. And the last episode I do each calendar year is the House of EdTech SmackDown. So episode 257 is going to come your way on December 22nd, 2024. And the whole point of this is to let you, the listener, share what you have loved in education technology, where you share a website, a tech tip, a tool, an app, whatever you have loved here in 2024 that is education and technology related. I want you to share that with me and the entire listening community. You can see things that have been mentioned before, and it's okay if you repeat it, if it's still relevant to you and it's still making your life easier in education and providing value to your students. I want to hear about it. You can check out some of the other things at chrisnesi.com/all-time-smackdown. Shout out to Derek Larson, who maintains that spreadsheet, which is a great historical record of some EdTech that has died along the way. But you can also see what is still relevant. Maybe there's a tool you've never heard of since, you might be new to the profession, or maybe there's this tool you'd heard of, it's still there. Go check out the spreadsheet. And if you want to participate in the SmackDown, you need to send me your submission by December 20th. I've got a handful already, so we are on our way, but I want to get you involved. So many people tell me each year, I wish I submitted it. Well, I'm trying to do a better job promoting it, as I tend to do every year. So you've got until December 20th, 2024 to submit a voicemail, record audio and email it to me. Send me an email to feedback@chrisnesi.com, Obviously, voicemails are preferred because this is a podcast, and if you send me text, well, you take your chances as to what impression of you I will do. And I like to have fun with that. So send me audio and do it by December 20th. All right, let's get into the final chapter of the book, and then I'll have some more reminders for you at the end of the episode. So now I present to you, I Like to Podcast and You Will Too, A House of EdTech Guide to Podcasting, chapter number 9, Conclusions, Recaps, and Next Steps. Podcasting is a popular and rewarding medium for sharing ideas, stories, and information with a worldwide audience. By following the steps outlined in this book, you can successfully launch and grow your own podcast. These are the key points covered in the book. Chapter 1, the first chapter. I discussed and introduced the basics of podcasting and shared various formats and topics that are popular among podcast listeners. In the second chapter, we explored how to choose a topic and format that will be engaging and relevant to your target audience. The second chapter also covered the topic and format of your show, and that includes considering the interests of your target audience, as well as the strengths and expertise of you as a podcast host. The chapter also discusses the various podcast formats, such as solo, co-hosted, a panel, interview style, and also how to choose the best one for your content. In Chapter 3, we covered the importance of planning and preparing for your podcast, including setting goals, creating a schedule, and gathering the necessary equipment and resources. The fourth chapter covered the process of recording and editing your podcast. This included tips for achieving high-quality audio, as well as recommendations for editing software and other resources in the creation process. This chapter also discussed the importance of following a consistent recording and editing process to ensure that each episode is polished and professional. In Chapter 5, we explored the various ways that you can promote and distribute your podcast, including submitting it to popular directories, using social media to reach new listeners, and then in the sixth chapter, we discussed the potential for monetizing your podcast through advertising, sponsorships, and some other revenue streams. This included advice on working with advertisers and sponsors, as well as tips for maximizing your earnings and the earnings potential. This chapter also covered the legal and ethical considerations for monetizing your podcast and how to avoid alienating your audience. In Chapter 7, we covered strategies for growing your podcast audience and building your brand, including engaging with your listeners and collaborating with other podcasters. And then in the 8th chapter, we covered common challenges that podcasters face, and we provided some troubleshooting tips for overcoming them. This included advice on dealing with difficult guests, technical issues, and low audience engagement. Chapter 8 also discussed strategies for staying motivated and committed to your podcast, even when faced with obstacles and setbacks. And now in this chapter, let's finish up with setting some goals and what do you do next? So let's set some goals and create a plan for continuing to grow and improve your podcast. Number 1, define your goals and objectives for the podcast, such as increasing the number of listeners, improving the quality of the content, or generating revenue. Number 2, identify your target audience. And what do they want from the podcast? And create content that is relevant and engaging to that audience. Number 3, develop a schedule for recording and releasing episodes and stick to it consistently to maintain momentum and build an audience. Number 4, invest in high-quality equipment and use good editing software. This will improve the sound and the production value of your podcast. Number 5, promote the podcast through social media, advertising, and other channels to reach new listeners and grow your audience. Number 6, engage with the audience and solicit feedback to understand what they like and don't like about the show, and use that information to improve and evolve your content. Number 7, seek collaborations and partnerships with other podcasters and industry experts to add value and credibility to the podcast. Number 8, continuously evaluate the progress of the podcast and make adjustments to the content, format, and promotion strategy as needed to achieve your desired results. Now, what are the next steps in your podcast journey? Now that you've read this book, the logical next steps for a podcaster would be to choose a topic and format for your podcast that's going to be engaging and relevant to an audience. Plan and prepare for your podcast by setting goals that we just talked about, creating that schedule, gathering and putting together your equipment, and going through the resources for your content. Here's the big one: record and edit your podcast. Follow consistent processes. Use equipment. Use the editing software. Just hit record. You might want to consider monetizing your podcast, but that goes back to goal setting. And if that's something you want to do, make that a goal right from the beginning. Next, grow your audience. If you're just starting out, if you have an audience, great. But you might be building this audience one download at a time. And build your brand by engaging with your listeners. Collaborate with other podcasters. There might be challenges, there might be obstacles. You might forget to hit record on an important interview. Don't panic. Be human. Be authentic. Stay motivated and committed to your podcast. Now, there are many resources and supports available for ongoing learning and development in podcasting. These can include podcasting forums and communities where experienced podcasters share their knowledge and provide support and advice to newcomers. These forums can be a great way to learn about the latest trends and techniques in podcasting, as well as connect with other podcasters and potential collaborators. If you're looking for that, 1, you can connect with me if you're going to do a podcast in the education space. 2, connect with me if you're going to podcast in general. I can connect you to a lot of other people. If you're using Facebook, there are tons of Facebook groups for podcasters to collaborate in and communicate in. There's also a lot of Discord communities. If you're looking to get connected with other podcasters, please send me an email, feedback@chrisnessy.com. There are also podcasting conferences and workshops. Just like us as teachers, we go to conferences, we connect, we learn professionally. There are some great podcast conferences out there. I won't name them because sometimes they don't exist anymore and they come and they go. So if you're looking for the latest information, reach out to me when you're listening to this and I can let you know of and recommend some great podcasting conferences that are appropriate and happening now. Next, consider signing up for podcast courses or online training programs. A lot of these will provide step-by-step guidance, a lot more detail than I'm able to put into a book like this. But again, if you really want to get into this, I'm willing to work with you. Reach out to me, feedback@chrisnessy.com. I don't have formal coursework for you, so it would be like a one-on-one thing. It's kind of what I did for somebody like Brian Carpenter of Fresh Air at 5. We live streamed it. If I remember, I will link to that in the show notes because I think I streamed that live and that was pretty cool. So check out the show notes for this episode at chrisnessy.com/256. And if there is no video of me working with Brian Carpenter, send me an email, feedback@chrisnessy.com. And of course, there are podcasting books and guides. I wrote a very small one. Thank you for listening to it. But these books can be a great resource for both beginners and experienced podcasters to improve their skills and knowledge. There are so many resources available beyond the things that I've talked about, beyond this book. You just have to go looking for it. Take advantage of the resources that you can find, and you can continue to either start, improve, and grow your podcast. Connect with other like-minded individuals in the podcasting community. Podcasting is a rewarding and engaging medium that allows you to share your ideas and experiences with a wide audience. By following the steps outlined in this book, you can successfully launch and grow a podcast. On this page, there is a QR code. I can't tell you what to scan, but I know what it links to, and that is chrisnessy.com/schoolpodcast. And that is where I have all of my podcast resources, episodes that I've done in the past, links to gear on Amazon, things that I recommend. And by the way, if you do shop for anything and you use my link, I do get a little affiliate income for that. So that is another way that you can support the podcast by using my links. I think chrisnessy.com/Amazon is also a thing, but I could be wrong. If it's not, I'm sorry. But just let me know and I can make recommendations. And that's another way that I can put a few pennies in my pocket. And that's the book. A little emotional here. Yeah. So podcasting has been a wonderful experience for me, and the book is closed now. So this is just me yapping with you. So what podcasting has done for me has been tremendous since I launched this podcast in January of 2014. You know, the podcast has surpassed and is approaching 2 million downloads in the time that I've been producing it. This podcast has afforded me the opportunity to travel to a number of places. It's allowed me to connect with so many people worldwide. And I'm just a high school history teacher from New Jersey who has a passion for technology in his classroom. And with the encouragement of my wife, I decided to start talking about it and talking to other people about it. And you can do the same thing. You can do a podcast on whatever you are passionate about. It takes work. It's not always easy, but I have enjoyed every millisecond that I have spent on the microphone creating the House of EdTech podcast. And I am very much looking forward to what the future holds for the show as we go into 2025 and beyond. The next episode, 257, is going to be the next installment, the 11th installment of the annual House of EdTech Smackdown. And where it goes from there, your guess is as good as mine. I have a pretty good idea of where the show is going to go. And I look forward to you being there with me every step of the way. And I hope you enjoyed the sharing, the reading of the book. I will be transparent. I have slowly seen the download numbers decrease with each episode of me putting the book out there. And we'll see what happens with the numbers as they hopefully start to bounce back, or maybe people didn't feel like listening to the book or based on the titles. But hey, I felt obligated to put it out there and share what I'm doing with the book and getting that out there. Because ultimately, you know, creating podcasts and going through this process is something I feel everybody should experience. And I wanted to create a resource that teachers could use, people outside of education could use. You could use it with students. You could share these episodes with students. And anybody can do this. And I think that everybody should try. So that's all I got. If you have questions, comments, you want to chat, chrisnessy.com/discord. You can email me directly, feedback@chrisnessy.com. I'd love to know what you thought of me releasing 9 episodes over 9 weeks, going through each chapter of the book and adding a little bit more to the book and, kind of putting myself out there in a bit of a different way. Something else I did over the course of these 9 weeks, not each time, but I was also streaming these episodes on, I did a couple on TikTok. I did a couple on Instagram. I'm actually live on Instagram as I'm doing this right now. Shout out to Leo in Brazil, one of my awesome supporters who I know is watching. And, there we go. It's the holiday season and, I'm out of words. So I will wrap this episode up and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Don't stop listening. Listen all the way through. Because I know a lot of people, they stop listening and they don't go all the way to the end. Let's get to the end. Thank you again for listening to the House of EdTech. Please subscribe or follow this podcast wherever you're listening and continue to make this podcast a part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. Links and resources that I talked about in the episode can be found on my website. Go to chrisnessy.com/256. Of course, I want to hear from you. I value your feedback. I want to know your perspective. So don't hesitate to reach out. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you've got questions about podcasting, you've got questions about education, technology, let's go. Fire away. feedback@chrisnessy.com. Or better yet, send a voicemail. chrisnessy.com/voicemail. I want to connect with you. I'd also love it if you got value. I encourage you to share the podcast with another educator who would get value. Spread the word because I want to reach as many people as possible and you can help me do that. Thank you in advance for sharing the show. Lastly, I invite you to become an awesome supporter if you're getting value from my content. I'm incredibly grateful for the ongoing support from the following people: Leo Calbush, Brian Carpenter, Aaron Cummings, Jeff Herb, Peggy George, and Matt Miller. If you've gotten value from the podcast and you want to become an awesome supporter, just go to my website, chrisnessy.com/awesome. And that's going to take you right over to where you can become an awesome supporter. The next episode of the podcast will be episode 257, and that again will be the 2024 House of EdTech Smackdown. It's going to come your way on December 22nd, 2024. And if you would like to participate, and I really hope that you do, you need to send me your favorite app, website, tech tip, tech tool, program, lesson plan, something from education and technology that you loved in 2024. It's time to share. Don't be selfish. 'Tis the season. Share, share, share. All right. Until next time, I want to thank you for learning with me. I want to thank you for listening to all the chapters of the book. They will be here for you. They're on my website. So anytime you want to go back to it, you can do that. So let's close it out as we approach the end of another year. Remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.